When Channel 4 introduced what I'm going to go ahead and call the Neo-Blocks era of presentation, they made a vague claim. The Neo-Blocks era debuted, as I'm sure you're aware, with 4 oblique, vaguely troubling and entirely logo-free idents directed by Jonathan Glazer, and centred, inasmuch as they were centred at all, around the blocks that make up the iconic logo. The iconic logo they could never be bothered to show in the damn idents themselves. When they made their debut in September 2015, they were accompanied by a load of largely meaningless self-indulgent press bump, as you might expect. Among the half-formed Ark Christ self-interpretations was a vague promise that the story would be continued in future idents. To the extent that there ever was a discernible story at all, which is a very small extent indeed, it never was. Variations on the same 4 very vaguely related to the Channel 4 logo scenarios circled around for just over 2 years, accompanied by a better, if still unnecessarily obscure, general presentation style, which actually properly starred the blocks themselves. Then, around Halloween 2017, after a touch more than 2 years, the Glazer idents suddenly and without fanfare disappeared, and we were introduced to the Iron Giant. Finally, a central pivot, one that stays on screen for longer than a split second, and has a personality. It's entirely possible that this is the intended continuation of the story, but it seems unlikely, if only because Glazer's not involved this time. If this really was meant to be part 2 of that conceit, you'd think the originator would be behind them. Instead, these are the work of a team headed by Dougal Wilson, who's done adverts for Coca-Cola and Orange and music videos for Goldfrapp and Coldplay, and he took the fundamental idea left behind, fetishising the blocks that make up the logo, and instead of seeding the blocks around ambiently, Wilson and his team made a whole new icon out of something that was already iconic. Incidentally, that's also Dougal Wilson on the soundtrack with the acoustic guitar version of David Dundas's Fourscore, making its comeback after over a quarter of a century. The jangly reinterpretation from the early 90s doesn't count. It's inspired by it, but it's not the same thing. This, on the other hand, is, albeit with a fresh arrangement that sounds a little bit Mason Williams, or Mike Alexander maybe. Accompanied by the giant himself, who is apparently only capable of speaking in the Fourscore motif through a foghorn. These aren't my idea of idents. I still long for the day that simple, iconic logo-based animations make a comeback, but that aesthetic is being actively fought against and disparaged by the current generation of designers. Hence things like this and the Glazer idents, and Viacom's rebrand of Channel 5, where they created this really involved new logo and then kept it out of the idents completely. And obviously the BBC, in trying to keep up, have instead just fouled themselves in front of an entire nation, as so often happens when they try to ride the coattails of the zeitgeist instead of creating it. I lost the thread of what I was saying. These aren't my idea of what idents should be. But no one cares about my idea of what idents should be. I still missed a complete Channel 4 logo, although shortly before they introduced the giant, they updated the blipverts and breakers to include it, briefly, as if they'd suddenly remembered they have an iconic symbol with 30 years of history behind it, and that they were only using it in a recognisable form on the news, which no one watches. but you can discern its traces in the Giant much better than you could from the background appearances of the blocks in the Glazer idents. All things considered, the Giant is great. There were sporadic attempts to give the 4 a personality in the mid-90s when BBC Two was doing the same thing with their logo, but it never worked as well because the blocky and then multicoloured 4 is so much more involved than the monochrome single-part bladed 2. But Dougal-Wilson has finally managed it by rearranging its constituent parts into a huge benevolent stick figure. The realisation of the big guy, I assume, is at least CGI assisted, although Channel 4 have been careful not to reveal exactly how it was made, or the ratio of computer wizardry to physical effects, if any. Suffice to say, whatever that ratio is, they've got it right. The best thing of all is this ident. This has already irritated Daily Mail readers no end, and they're just going to keep showing it. And that is very Channel 4.